Hey and welcome to Neverwinter with Aragon. So here I want to cover the Barbarian in single target damage. What setup you should be using to maximize your damage, but ultimately to compare versus other classes. We're going to be using the exact same test requirements as we did with my previous video on Wizard. You can see the DPS there. The different setups I used there as well. But Barbarian recently had a lot of adjustments, making a lot of different abilities pretty viable. And so it can take a lot of testing to find out what's actually the best setup. Should you be using Raging Strikes or Steel Blitz? Should you be using a Trample with Punishing? Or should you have Indomitable with Impatience? Or should you have Relentless Battle Rage or Escalating or Overpenetration or Brutal Critical? There's a lot of options now with Barbarian that actually work pretty well, that you won't really notice any difference unless you really do a lot of extensive testing, which we have gone and done here now. So this again is the test requirements. We have the buffer artifact to simulate artifact calls. That's right here. So if you're in a 10-man trial, you'll get the same effect if you have this artifact. But since I'm alone, I'm using that to simulate it. We're at about 90,000 item level, and we have all of our stats maxed out while in combat at 90%. I'll show that just here, all 90s. As for the rest, we just have limited damage buffs, so we have the same on all the other classes with regards to, say, companions, equipment. In terms of mount combat power, we're using just 3000 magnitude. On the Barbarian here, we are using Big B's hand because it's strength based, and thus we'll gain the extra damage from that. On Wizard, I went and used the Golden Touch, which is magical, so it's fair there. But we're not using vecna because that's currently broken and will be fixed very soon. Bloodlust, life lessons, and all the rest you see there. But most importantly, 3-minute plus duration. In each of my tests, I make sure to do 4 artifact calls, 1 at the beginning and then 3 throughout, and then you end on the 4th artifact call when you have completed it. And so we end up with this entire table with all of the tests I've done. I've done a ton more tests than this. Double checking, triple checking, making sure that I'm getting a good value for the tests. But you can see this again, all here. And some important things to note is animation cancelling does play a role. For example, this is the exact same test pretty much as the one above it, but one's without animation cancelling and one is with. And that animation cancelling is just with Relentless Slash. You can optimize a teeny bit further by animation cancelling, say Bloodletter a tiny bit, but I haven't found it all too useful. You may also note that I'm recommending here Brutal Critical over Penetration. And there's a big reason towards that, and that is because these tests include full artifact calls, which means, again, you get the benefit of, say, the buffer artifact, which gives you a bunch of total damage buffs, which also means you're diluting, say, the damage buff of overpenetration, and you also more noticeably see that overpenetration doesn't actually increase all your damage. It only increases, say, abilities. It doesn't increase your mount power, which is a big portion of your damage. And so you do notice that it becomes better to run Brutal Critical. You can especially see the tests there. Same with Steel Blitz and Raging Strikes. I found Raging Strikes can perform a teeny bit better, and otherwise Steel Blitz is very good. But it's more luck dependent, and you might not get many triggers of that in an artifact call, especially because you're not using many at-wills there. It can be better to just have Raging Strikes and increase all your hits a bit bigger in an artifact call. And otherwise, yeah, there's no real question between Escalating Rage and Relentless Battle Rage. You can see the best Relentless Battle Rage test was like 1.138 million versus the best Escalating Rage at 1.3 million. Additionally, having Punishing Charge over Indomitable Battle Strike is the way to go, just to get that Trample of the Fallen buff there. That's pretty impactful. But again, if you're running with a Sentinel tank who can give this benefit against the enemy, giving you that debuff, might be better to switch to Indomitable Battle Strike here because it's not that bad compared to the top. You would run Indomitable, Steel Blitz, and Raging Strikes. And again, you can see a bit of the rotations here, and some of them have animation cancelling, some of them don't. Like this third one here, no animation cancelling. Pretty much the same as the one above it, and yeah, it's pretty close, but animation cancelling, you can squeeze out a little bit more damage. So now I just want to show you that actual top performing test. So here we are. We're going to start with an artifact call. We have our rage. We are using our encounters. Then we use our daily power. Then our mount power. And just encounter powers again there with punishing and bloodletter frenzy. You can't get in twice. I don't even think you could with 3 tacticians, but yeah, I doubt anybody has 3 tacticians unless you manage to get the dark wings along with the Neverwinter hand. But nonetheless, yeah, you can see on the bottom right there our damage next to our name, and then our DPS. So the DPS is currently dropping as we move away from the artifact call. It will spike back up again during the artifact call, but we've already done about 60 million damage. Something to really note is the amount of damage you do in an artifact call versus the amount of damage you do outside of an artifact call. And you'll actually find in these tests, you do about 70% of your damage in an artifact call. It's pretty crazy. So you're doing 70% of your damage in 10 seconds, and the remaining 50 seconds is only like 30% of your overall damage. So it's vitally important you have set up for these artifact calls and are doing the correct rotation. So for this rotation, we're having the rage for that, and then you just use the punishing charge, bloodletter, frenzy, and then crescendo, then your mount power, and then it's back to using the bloodletter and the punishing, and you can use a few at-wills there in between the cooldowns, and that's your artifact call. And you can just do really well because the amount of buffs Barbarian got is kind of crazy. You have 50% extra damage buff while within that rage with the new escalating rage, and then you have the Trample of the Fallen buff, and you also have then small relentless slash buff too. So here we're approaching the next artifact call. We need to make sure we get our rage up. We're just animation cancelling relentless slash there. And then we go into the rage, artifact, punishing, bloodletter, frenzy, crescendo. And after that, we're going to the mount power. And I have found crescendo definitely outperforms savage advance, especially if you're not perfect with animation cancelling savage advance, because the idea would be to animation cancel savage advance and then have a little bit more time to use some at-wills. But I found in all of my tests it was just far easier and reliable to just go with crescendo, and overall it was just dealing an absolute ton of damage there versus a few more hits you could get in brash strike there. And yeah, then we're going to the 4th artifact call here in about 20 seconds. Our damage is over 200 million and our DPS is that 1.16. It's dropping down a bit, but again you'll see it spike with this artifact we're going to do in a second. We're just waiting on our mount there. We've gone the artifact using our encounters, that crescendo, then the mount power, and then 2 of the other encounters again, and that's the artifact call, and we're left with over 260 million damage and 1.302 million encounter DPS. You can see the entire log there, and this is it here zoomed in a little bit. You can see the mount power, 20% of your damage, crescendo 18% of your damage, followed by bloodletter also 18%, then frenzy 15%, brash strike 12%, then that punishing charge at 9%, relentless slash was 3% based on using it with animation cancelling, and then you just have life lessons, enchanter's hex, and bloodlust is a very measly bonus there, but triggering it helps put the debuff on the target, and that again is the overall best setup I found that performs the most single target damage. That is again compared to all of these other setups. If you have any questions on these, feel free to drop them in the comments below and I'll get back to you. But I sure put hours and hours and hours testing all of this. And ultimately, yeah, it can perform just on par with the wizard, above 1.3 million encounter DPS there. So there's no real excuse if you're in a fight which isn't heavy on mechanics. You should be able to keep up with wizards, not much problem. The only issue arises is when content does force you away from your target, forces you to stop attacking, to play on mechanics so you survive. Just be aware though that you are a lot more tanky than other classes, because whenever you're within that rage, you do get the damage resistance by 15%. Along with that control immunity, especially helpful in like dragon hunts. On top of that, having Forte, which is bonus awareness, one of the better defensive stats, particularly in boss fights. So hopefully this was somewhat insightful. I will go on to compare other classes as well, do the same tests, figuring out what's the optimal setups for them as well. Just be aware it can change a little bit depending on what group compositions you're with. Otherwise, Barbarian doesn't have a lot going on for it. It's pretty simple with regards to the damage outputs there. There's nothing hidden, no sneaky mechanics, just raw damage from the abilities you use. No damage overtime effects, no extra proc effects, just massive damage buffs, big hits, and yeah, you're very solid right now in single target damage. So many thanks again to these channel members for their added support, and we'll see you guys around. Goodbye for now.